Hello, this is Vakar Alisha. I am a doctoral researcher at the Center for Applied Language Study, the University of Jyväskylä, Finland. So, in my part one on semantics, I just started talking about C.K. Ogen and I.A. Richards' approach, and then Bloomfield's approach on meaning. And we learned that, for example, C.K. Ogen and I.A. Richard, they looked at meaning, from different perspectives. They actually tried to reword the meaning, which were proposed by uh, different, sociologists and philosophers and psychologists and literary critics. And then Bloomfield actually tried to limit it to the science that we can define a particular word in terms of scientific, terminologies. They both were actually criticized for their limitations, and then, the question emerged as to we need to define linguistics, okay, in terms of linguistics itself. And this was the time by 1920s we would see that a linguistic turn in semantics started. And the very important, field, important social theory, we would say, that was structuralism at that time, which was, emerging in response to various, subjective philosophies like, phenomenology and existentialism. And this structuralism actually influenced the field of the study of language as well. And there we see that a structural linguistics emerges. And with this rise of structural linguistics, the meaning, the concept of meaning was totally redefined, and it was defined in relation to the language, not outside language. So we will see how the meaning has been defined. So in this, 20th century, the modern linguistic approach, we will see that there's no escape from language. So, different, social philosophers, thinkers, and language, theorists, they started, assuming that we cannot have escape from language. Language is all around, language is everywhere. So if we have a language at the core of, human social structure, then we need to, understand things within the language, not outside language itself, because language itself can be very enriching source of, meanings. So how to study semantics linguistically? Some of the ideas or proposals appeared as, for example, we can study uh, relations within a language such as paraphrasing and synonymy. If we want to know the meaning of the word, we just need to look at the paraphrasing. How do people paraphrase a particular word, and what are the different synonyms for this particular word within the dictionary or within the you know overall language. And other people propose that we can go for the semantic relations. If we want to understand the language, we need to see at antonymy, polysemy, homonymy, and hyponymy, presupposition, entailment. These themselves are very important tools of meaning making, and they can be studied in relation to understanding of meaning itself. But especially we would see here the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, which is again bringing meaning within the scope of language, not outside it. And the book which are the compiled by his students, that was called Course in General Linguistics. This book became very important source for understanding languages actually within the structural paradigm. So language was actually considered as a self-contained system or a structure. So language is a structure, language is a system, and therefore, if we want to understand the meaning, we need to locate the meaning within that system or within that structure. And they suggested a meaning resides in language. And how was meaning defined here? Meaning was actually defined as a uh, as a combination of signifier and signified. So, for example, Sasho gave the term like linguistic sign to the word. So the linguistic sign is actually anything that stands for anything else. So it's not only the word; it can be a sound, it can be a letter, it can be any kind of flavor, color, even different objects can be linguistic signs in Sassoon linguistics. Now, how the meaning is possible for a particular linguistic sign? According to Sassoon linguistics, it is just made up of signifier and signified. Now, signifier is a sound, okay, that we produce. It's actually psychological, the sound that produces a psychological sensation in the mind. For example, if I say a book, Now, book produces a psychological sensation. Something is happening, something is emerging in our mind. So that would be known as signifier. And then signified is what is the sound image. Okay, uh, the image of the object actually. Now, what object is there? For example, what is the concept associated with particular sound? That would be known as signified. Let's say when I say book, the image or the particular concept, the mental image of the concept is appearing in your mind. Now, that mental image, not the real object, but the mental image of the concept, that would be known as signified. So linguistic sign is nothing but a combination of signifier and then signified sound and then the concept. And this entire linguistic sign in the Sassoon linguistic is something which is in the mind, okay, which is completely psychological. And the question here arises, for example, okay, why is it so that when I say a book, the image of the book is appearing? Why not a pen? Why not a television? Why not a laptop? Why is so? So he, Sasha actually proposed that the relationship between the signifier and signified is actually conventional. It's arbitrary. Now, arbitrary means it is a convention, it is a society that actually, agrees to call a particular word, okay, it attaches certain meanings with a word, and then they become established. So this is how this conventionalization of a linguistic sign is very important in the Sassoon linguistics, and it's quite opposed to Plato's tradition. Like there is a natural connection between the words and the objects. We call it dog because there is a dogness in the dog. We call cat a cat because there is a catness in the cat. So there was a natural connection in Plato's tradition, and this is where Saussure, deviates himself from this natural tendency in language, but he believed that it is a completely a conventionalization. So now, apart from that, we would see that uh, again another linguistic turn in the study of meaning, in the study of language that appears uh, with the rise of emergence of cognitive revolution in 1960s. Cognitive science actually emerged as a revolutionary science in 1960s, and it helped to understand the mental processes, okay, involving different things, be it a language or be it other social phenomena. So this cognitive science actually influenced the Noam Chomsky as well. Okay, and Noam Chomsky started looking at language within that cognitive perspective or paradigm, and we also call it a kind of formalist tradition in linguistics. So for Chomsky, language is something which is biologically programmed, okay, in human beings. So we are born to produce language because language is something in our brain, in our mind. It's not a particular language, but the capability of acquiring languages, producing languages is something innate. So therefore, we need to study those processes, okay, involving language acquisition, language learning, meaning making processes, okay, by looking at the brain, looking at the cognitive and mental processes, and therefore you will see that when it was within this formalist tradition, if we want to define a meaning, then we need to look at the concept of Chomsky's competence. By Chomsky's competence, this is very abstract concept, because competence is like underlying rules of a language. Now, but underlying rules of language are something which are actually in the mind of the speaker, which are mind of the native speaker rather. So Chomsky idealized the concept of a native speaker, and if we want to know the meaning of the word, it would be the native speaker who would actually tell us the exact true meaning of the words. So semantic competence is possessed by the native speakers, and therefore they can actually tell us whether the certain utterance is odd, is a contradictory, is a sensical, or is a nonsensical. They can tell us, and therefore uh, we need to look at those mental process of the native speaker, okay, how they acquire languages and how they produce languages. And since then you would see that a complete new school in linguistics appears, that's known as generative grammar school. And this TG school that followed Noam Chomsky's linguistics or Chomskyan linguistics, and that was dominated, for a longer period of time in history. I would say that like some 4 decades that dominated, and uh, new universities and some new departments were created, established to understand, the generative grammar or Chomskyan linguistics or Chomskyan basis of the language and the meaning making processes. But uh, we will see that how that concept was challenged. But let's see how Chomsky thinks about semantic competence. So for example, Chomsky believes that a native speaker it lives in the real world, and therefore he knows better about the language, how it is being used there, and therefore this is actually internalized, and this comes in the mind actually. So there are two sentences like my uncle always sleeps standing on the toe and my uncle always sleeps awake. Okay, so now who would tell us that which sentence or utterance is semantically odd or which is actually semantically accurate? A native speaker, due to the real life experiences, will find a contradiction in the utterances above and thus label them as semantically odd. So it's not possible my uncle always sleeps awake and then my uncle always sleeps standing on one toe. Though syntactically they are correct actually, but when we look at the semantics, they may be contradictory. So the real world experiences also aid to the explanation of semantic processes taking place within the language. That's what Chomsky always suggests. For example, that like Chomsky said that okay, the language acquisition device is something which is innate, but it is something which is triggered by the environment. So Chomsky is not completely rejecting the role played by environment in triggering human languages. So therefore, the real world effect of languages on mind is very important in the cognitive science. Now, Chomsky's famous sentence, you might be interested here to see that he proposed like colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Now he just tells us about the semantics, how it is becoming odd here. So though the grammatical structure, the syntactic structure of the sentence is completely fine, there's no issue with it, but it is semantically odd actually. So how can ideas be green? How can they be colorless at the same time? And then how can ideas actually sleep? So that is actually where Chomsky not looking at symbolic or other meanings associated with the language. He is more interested in finding the particular linguistic meanings. So therefore, this Sassorian linguistics and Chomskyan linguistics, they both try to confine and limit the language to the linguistics as a science, not outside linguistics. Now, if we look at these two schools of thought, there are some problems that emerge. Okay, for example, both of them, be it a formalist tradition or a structural tradition in linguistics, they both traditions actually look at language as a self-contained system. They don't see the possibility of other sciences influencing language itself, influencing linguistics itself as a science. They look at language as a self-contained system, and therefore they are more interested in mental lexicon. Now we need to see the language in relation to the system. For example, the way Saussure suggested that if we want to understand the meaning of the word, the concept of difference is very important. For example, we need to know that uh, if we want to know the meaning of the dog, then we need to use the concept of difference. The dog is not dog because it's not a cat. Cat is not cat because it's not elephant. Elephant is not elephant because it's not a lion. The chain goes on. So within the language, you have to define a particular word, how words are related to other words in a linguistic system. That's more important for Saussure. So therefore, and this is actually something that goes here in the mind. So this mental lexicon is more important for a formalist and a structural school of thought, and they focus on denotative meaning, and they don't look at other types of meaning. For example, Geoffrey Leach in his book Semantics, written in 1970s, he proposed 7 different types of meanings. Like we have social meaning, we have connotative meaning, we have thematic, we have reflected meaning. So other meanings are possible. They're also working in society at the same time, but which are actually ignored in these traditions. So Chomsky's competence is very abstract thing. Okay, it is something which is in the mind alone. Now, the understanding of meaning, it does not stop here only now until the formalist traditions, but at the same time you would see that in parallel with these two schools of thought, there are some other studies going along, and we need to look at them as well. For example, even by the time when C.K. Ogen, I.O. Richards, and Bloomfield, they wrote the books, okay, about meaning, there were some other theorists, other linguists as well, like you know uh, Sapir and Worf. Okay, they also proposed one important hypothesis, Sapir and Worf hypothesis. They suggest that the concepts of like linguistic determinism, linguistic relativity, and how language influences society, and the way society influences language. At the same time, we see that there were some other, fields that also studied meaning and meaning. For example, we see the discourse, the emergence of discourse as a very important, concept in understanding the notion of meaning. Uh, and within discourse, again, it's a very, broader field, and there are different, trends and theoretical positions within the discourse to understand the concept of, meaning itself. And even defining the word discourse itself is very complex, because we have different understandings of discourse itself, and then we need to see the meaning in discourse. So in discourse studies, the major thing that is studied is the language is not something within to be studied within language, but within the language as a system. But we need to see language or the meaning, outside language. We don't need to look at the meaning in linguistics alone. We need to see that how language actually works within the society. Language in use is very important. So this is where in discourse studies, people, theorists started understand started to study about the construction of subjectivity, how humans are made subjects. For example, my identity, let's say it's an ethnic identity, it's a linguistic identity, or it's a religious, it's a cultural, or gender identity. So how these different identities are actually they emerge in a person. Okay, so they believe that this subjectivity is constructed by different meanings, and meanings are actually produced in discourse. And what is discourse? We have different approaches. For example, one of the school of thought is pragmatics. So for pragmatics, you will see that they look at the meaning like language in use. So we have to see that how particular, how language or how meaning is used in particular context only. And this again, this view is contested by different approaches like critical discourse analysis. They try to look at meaning as a political process other than psychological, mental, or only a social, but they look at some mental processes as well. So within CDA, we have different approaches, like one inspired by Marxist school of thought. Marxist linguistics is there that you can study. And then within Marxist linguistics, we can see there are different CDA trends, like Fairclough has different understanding. There's a neo-Marxian analysis of language and text and capital societies. And then Vodog, she has proposed a historical method in CDA that looks at meaning in historical context, how meanings have evolved over time, how they have changed, what similarities they have. And then Wayne Dyer, again, is a very important figure in CDA. He looks at, socio-cognitive model in discourse. He's interested in how mind, is engaged in the social processes, okay, of the meaning-making processes. Likewise, we have a French discourse analysis that looks at meaning in a different way. So Pichoux and Michel Foucault, they are very important figures, and they look at meaning as a very dynamic, as a very complex process, which is not only something neutral, but it is always power driven, and it is in discourse that meaning is created. And in discourse, we human beings are born, our identities are actually shaped, and they are produced there. So it's all about a kind of, we can say that meaning is an effect of power in French discourse analysis. So there's always a power behind the meanings. For example, we can always ask ourselves that why some meanings are dominant while others are less dominant. Why some meanings, they are used to exclude others and exclude some while include others. Why is it so? It is because there is actually a power behind the meanings. Now, what kind of power is it that we need to understand? So this is where in French discourse we will see post-structural tradition in meaning. uh, Post-structuralism, again, is very important. Maybe in other lectures I would be talking about difference between structuralism and post-structuralism, but I'm just giving you an overview here that there's a post-structural tradition that looks at meaning as a dynamic process rather than fixed entity. Then we see then there are other approaches like psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis is again emerged or is combined with post-structuralism, and then Marxism even. Okay, and then trying to understand language, trying to understand meaning making processes. So in a nutshell, I would say that to understand meaning, what we can do is we can always understand meaning in a way that we need to locate the development of different conceptual frameworks on meaning developed by different schools of thought. We need to look at that, how meaning is developed and understood by different school of thought. For example, if it is a C.K. Ogen and I. Richards tradition, it is a Bloomfieldian tradition, it is a Saussurian tradition, or it is a formalist or cognitive tradition by Chomsky, and then we see post-structuralist, we see Marxist tradition. So we have different kind of schools of thought, and we need to see how meaning is conceptualized in each different system, and that is where we can develop our thorough understanding of the meaning. And we don't need to look at the meaning as a very very neutral entity, neutral linguistic outcome in the language processes, but it is very ideological. It is political as well. So for example, Fairclough says that all language is political. So one of the aspects of the language is political, while other, they may not agree. They say that no, language is something which is a psychological entity. It's used for communication as a very innocent and neutral tool. So we have different competing explanations in the field of linguistics, and I would definitely say that we need to look at linguistics in relation to other sciences, how they are emerging and how they are influencing linguistics itself, because the influence of other sciences, other social sciences, cannot be avoided when studying a language. That's the fact that we need to understand as a linguist, as a researcher. Thank you so much. In next sessions, I would try to explore more about structuralism, Sasho's understanding of structuralism and language in a broader perspective, and then in sequence we would have look at post-structuralism and then psychoanalysis. So there's so much that we would try to cover in different lectures. Thank you so much.